Hi guys, and welcome to a Hector Lecture Guide to the fight Ultima. This guide is based off of the Minstrel's Ballad Ultima's Bane Extreme fight that is currently in the game. However, everything in this guide should be applicable to the new Unreal version of Ultima that's coming out in the game shortly. Before the fight begins, you want to agree on two positions with your team. First is how to deal with the first and second Aetheric Boom. These can be dealt with a number of ways, but I recommend having your tanks and melees stacked together at A and your healers and range together at B. You also need to agree positions for the third Aetheric Boom. I recommend doing partner stacks and having this be on intercardinals. You also, for this same mechanic, need an agreed direction. For this guide, I will be using clockwise. When the fight begins, have your main tank pull the boss slightly north of middle. Be aware, throughout the entirety of this fight, the boss will target the main tank with auto attacks that cleave. The range of the cleave is incredibly small, as you'll see here, but nonetheless, any player that has stood too near to the main tank will get hit by those autos, and just a few autos is enough to kill a non-tank player. Similarly important, some of these autos will give the main tank a stack of this debuff here. This is Viscous Etheroplasm. Now, 1, 2, 3, 4 stacks don't matter. They don't affect the tank in any way, shape, or form. They just slowly build up as the player gets hit by the autos that give this particular debuff. But if any player gets to 5, they get a dot that will hit them for nearly their entire health bar with every tick, guaranteeing they will eventually die. You just need to deal with this by making sure that you swap tanks before this tank can get to 5 stacks. I recommend doing swaps at 3 stacks for safety. Now, there's a bunch of base mechanics that will be used throughout the fight. These are used sort of interchangeably. There's no cast bar to them, and they don't hit very hard, but I'll show you them nonetheless. There's Cerulean Vent, which the boss explodes, hitting everybody in melee range with very light damage. Just be aware that your melees will take very light damage if they're attacking the boss. And Homing Lasers will have the boss fire off two things that look quite a bit like missiles. That'll target a random player with splash damage. If you're too near to that player, you take the same amount of very light damage, but this is almost negligible, so you don't need to do much to avoid these. If you do want to make things easiest on your healer, just have your healers arranged out of melee range, and make sure that everybody's spread out lightly. The first phase of this fight is Garuda. Currently, the boss is empowered with all 3 of the major primals, Titan, Garuda, and Ifrit, so you're going to see a mixture of mechanics from all 3 of them. At the beginning, Garuda's going to land in the middle of the arena. As you see Garuda land, I recommend you pop Knockback Immunity and head towards the middle. Garuda's going to target a random section of the arena with Mistral Shriek. Now, this is very easy to just walk out of because it's quite a slow time between when you see the AoE marker and when the attack actually hits, but to make things difficult, the boss is going to use Ifrit's Vulcan Burst at the same time. If you've popped your knockback immunity, this is no problem, but if you haven't, that Vulcan Burst is going to send you flying into the wall and might make it hard to dodge the Mistral Shriek attack. Assuming you've popped knockback immunity, just walk out of it to avoid the extra damage. After a while, the boss is next going to use Eye of the Storm from Garuda. You need to be inside this, but you want to be as close to the edge of it as possible. Immediately after this disappears, Titan's going to land in the middle with a Geocrush, doing proximity-based damage. So as soon as the Eye of the Storm disappears, run to the edge of the arena to take minimal damage from this. These mechanics will now repeat from the very beginning until you get the boss below 82%. At this point in time, Garuda gets kicked out, disappears, and you've started the next phase, Titan Phase. Now you're only getting a mixture of Titan and Ifrit mechanics. As soon as you see this phase begin, I recommend having the entirety of your party stack due middle except for your current main tank. You're going to see some fiery plumes from Ifrit appear around the outside of the arena. Shortly after this, you're going to get Titan Weight of the Lands in the middle. They're going to look like this. If you look carefully, you'll notice the middle of the arena is perfectly safe to dodge both sets of AoEs. The only person who can't go there is the main tank, as they'll hit the party with auto attack cleaves, so if you want to avoid that damage, they're going to do the mechanic properly of dodging in slightly and then back out. It looks like this. Afterwards, the boss is going to cast Tank Purge, which is just a pretty hard-hitting raid-wide, mitigate, shield up, and heal afterwards appropriately. Following the Tank Purge, I recommend having your entire group together at the edge of the arena, sort of in one of the northern corners. The boss is now going to do Fiery Plumes in the middle, followed by Weight of the Lands on the outside. But once again, if you see the overlap of the two, there are quite a few safe spots. As long as you're at the edge of the arena, it's incredibly simple to just adjust into one of these. The only thing you want to make sure you do is not have your main tank in the same safe spot as your party, so you don't get any cleaves on them. Adjust into your safe spot, and stand still and DPS the boss. Once again, this whole set of mechanics is going to repeat until you get the boss below 68%, in which case, Titan is now kicked out, disappears, and you've started Phase 3, Ifrit Phase. Now the mechanics are going to be purely Ifrit mechanics. First up, 2 random players are going to be targeted with eruptions underneath them. If your whole party is stacked together, everyone without an eruption can just move to the other side of the boss, while the eruptions move away from the boss and group these together in one circle. Altogether, each person is going to get 5 eruptions underneath them. If you're uncertain if you are one of the people targeted with eruptions, it can be tricky to see. You might as well go along with the eruption players to make sure you don't accidentally bait the eruptions on the rest of the group. There's a dozen different ways to deal with this, just don't bait your eruptions near to the tanks or the rest of the party. After this, you get another Tank Purge raid-wide to heal through. And now we get something a little bit tricky. There's a set of 4 Fiery Plumes, and Ifrit appears on a random side of the arena. These plumes will appear not quite cardinals or intercardinals, but always in the same set pattern, and Ifrit's going to appear in a random location ready to dash through the middle of the arena. One thing that's key to this, there's always a safe spot to dodge everything up near the north of the arena, so I recommend just having everyone grouped more or less together to deal with this together. After the first explosion, another set in a line are going to appear, and before these explode, Ifrit's going to dash across the arena. Make sure that you're positioned to avoid both the plumes and the dash. Following this, you get a second set, slightly off-center from where the previous ones were. Deal with these in the exact same way, making sure that your current tank does not get too close to the party so they don't accidentally cleave the party. Once again, just dodge the plumes and the dash, and you're good to go. Now these Ifrit mechanics are going to repeat starting from the eruptions until you get the boss below 50%, at which case Ifrit is kicked out, disappears, and now you've entered the final phase, Ultima Phase. From this point onwards, the mechanics are purely Ultimas. The first one you're going to get immediately on the start of this phase is a big one, Aetheric Boom. When you see this cast bar, position yourself ready to get knocked back with tanks and melees getting knocked back towards A and healers in range towards B. As the cast finishes, the knockback goes off, and 4 orbs spawn. Let's break down how these work. These orbs are going to be tethered in pairs, and they're going to slowly move towards each other. If a pair of orbs touches each other without being dealt with, they will explode in a massive explosion that wipes the raid. Instead, to deal with these, you need to have a player get in the way of one of these orbs. However, if it's not a tank, one player by themselves will soak the orb and pop both the other orb that's tethered, but that player will die in the process because the damage is too much. To correctly deal with these, you either need to have a tank with a cooldown pop this orb, or you can have the party pop it in groups of 2 or more. The more players that you have, the damage is spread between all of the players that soak the orb and are in the explosion, so the more players, the less damage everybody takes. Now, going back, rewinding to show how we deal with the first Aetheric Boom. Again, position tanks and melees to go towards A, healers in range to knock back towards B. As the knockback goes off, just position all together in a group to pop your first orb. Note that the current main tank, in this case OT, is positioned not so close to the group that they'll hit them with cleaves, but close enough that they can still be part of the explosion. If you find this too difficult, just have your tank go away and have the rest of the tanks and melees take the orb as a group of 3. It's more than enough. Now, I'm going to show you the rest of the Ultima mechanics that you'll see intermixed throughout this fight. These will be layered on top of the other major mechanics. There's Diffractive Laser. This is a mini tank buster that targets the current main tank. It hits in a pretty wide conal AoE, so just have nobody else in front of the boss. You also get Magitek Ray. The boss will rotate towards a random player, drop the AoE line marker. All you have to do is dodge out of this. And Etheroplasm Orbs. A random player gets targeted with a marker that looks like this, and an orb spawns. If you want to, you can just ignore this. The orb will go into the player, cause them pretty decent damage, and will damage any player around them, but this is never lethal and can be easily healed through. If you want to minimize the pressure you put on your healers, just have that player run away, baiting that orb away from the rest of the party, while everyone else makes sure they don't run into it either. Eventually, that orb will explode on its own, harmlessly away from everyone. Now, you're going to see a mixture of those three mechanics, as well as the other ones from the previous phase, like Cerulean Vent, Homing Missiles, and Tank Purge, until you get the boss below 40%. This will start the first add phase. You get 6 Magitek Bits spawning in a small circle around the middle. They're going to immediately start to target random players with these blue laser beam AoEs. Just like the Magitek Ray, you just walk out of these. Immediately start targeting down the adds as quickly as you can. Well, you do not have to kill them for any reason. They don't enrage. You can kill the boss with them still alive. It makes everything else much easier to dodge. It makes it a lot easier to see what's going on. So I recommend targeting them as quickly as possible. Shortly after those Magitek Bits spawn, and possibly while you're still attacking them, the boss is going to call down 2 airships towards the middle of the arena. These appear as proximity AoE markers. To deal with these, have your party group up either due north or due south at the edge of the arena to take minimal damage. Heal up through this, and continue to deal with the rest of the base Ultima mechanics. When the boss gets put below 30%, you get the second Aetheric Boom. Position exactly the same as you did for the first, and ride the knockback towards similar positions as the first one. This time, the tank melee orbs are much closer together, so they need to be popped very quickly. The healers in range have 2 orbs to deal with. I recommend popping the one further away from the boss first. Deal with your first explosion, exactly the same as the first Aetheric Boom. Now, have your healers in range check their health. If you've mitigated this well enough and you have enough health, you can immediately pop the second orb. If not, group up with the rest of the party near to the boss, and take that final orb as a group of 7. In this case, the damage will be negligible. Continue with the base mechanics, and shortly afterwards, when the boss gets below 25%, you get 8 Magitek Bits spawning around the outside of the arena using their same blue laser beam attacks. These take a little bit longer to kill because they're spread out, and therefore you can't hit them, multiple of them, with an AoE. Immediately try to get as many of these down as you possibly can, because shortly after they spawn, the boss again brings down airships. This time 4 of them on the edge of the arena, 1 at each cardinal. To take minimal damage from these, the party needs to stack up due middle, but since adds are likely still alive, you're going to get targeted by some of these laser beams. Try to stay as close to middle as you possibly can, while adjusting out of the laser beams. Once this has gone off, deal with the remaining adds, heal up, and I also recommend having whichever tank is currently tanking pull the boss middle ready for the final mechanic. Lastly, position yourself with your partner on your intercardinal agreed at the start of the fight. When the boss gets below 15%, they cast their final Aetheric Boom. This is considered to be the hardest mechanic in the fight. To make things simpler, I recommend saving your knockback immunity for this point and using it now. As long as you knockback immune the cast, you and your partner should stay on your intercardinal in great position to deal with these final sets of orbs. This time there's 4 sets, and they're tethered with a fairly short tether, meaning they need to be exploded quite quickly. Don't forget your agreed upon rotation direction, and just pop the orb in that direction for your pair. This should mean that everybody is spread out enough that you're taking these orbs in groups of 2. Because this is a smaller group than you took the other 2 sets in, I strongly recommend using pretty heavy mitigation, and if necessary, maybe even a tank LB to be able to make sure you survive these explosions. As long as your party is alive following this, you've done virtually everything hard. From this point onwards, the boss repeats just the basic set mechanics from Ultima in the same pattern. First a tank purge raid-wide, diffractive laser on the main tank, homing lasers targeting a random player, cerulean vent hitting everybody in melee range, Magitek Ray targeting a random player, just dodge out of this, and as well, etheroplasm orbs. This repeats over and over again until, at about 10 minutes into the fight, the boss will become briefly untargetable, reappear, and start casting Ultima. This is a slow cast, but this serves as the enrage for the fight. You have until the cast bar finishes to defeat the boss and clear the fight. If the boss finishes the cast, this will wipe the party. And that's it. That's everything you need to know about Ultima. Hope you've enjoyed this fight and found it useful. Thank you very much for watching. Let me know in the comment section if you've got any tips, suggestions, or questions. Thanks again, guys. Take care.